Hi, I'm Dr. Jim Goldstein, an adoptive parent with my wife of a boy and a girl who are now 23 years old. I've been giving this same talk, I guess, for about 22 years now, twice a year. And I'm very happy to be speaking with you tonight. It's my honor to speak with you. I wish I could be there in person, but I thought this would be the next best thing because I can't make it in person this time. What I want to speak to you about is called Managing the Stress of Waiting to Adopt. You may have already experienced that this whole fertility process and trying to find a baby and either trying to make a baby or trying to find a baby can be very stressful. The point I want to make, though, is that stress is not really a function of what you're going through. It seems like it is. Oh, we went through this adoption process. Oh, we went through this. It's actually a function of interpretation. That's the most important point I want to make, is that as human beings, we are meaning givers. That's what it means to be human. We give meaning to things. Things don't have any meaning until we give them meaning. And so a lot of the stress we feel has to do with how we interpret what's happening to us. The first thing I wanted to say was, though, that with Families for Private Adoption, and in the process you're in, you really can't fail. I don't know if you ever had any experience with going through fertility testing or all that kind of stuff, but that can be very, very rigorous and very difficult, and you can fail. You can spend a lot of money and a lot of time. I remember driving to Hopkins all this time and them testing me and testing my wife, and they really couldn't find anything wrong, but they thought they would do this operation that would increase my sperm count. I said, whatever. It didn't work. And in the end, they said, well, you might want to consider adoption. And I was affronted by that. I felt like, wait a minute. Okay, why can't you make this work? You said there was really nothing wrong with either of us. So they said, well, sorry, they gave us the big shrug. And they said, no, consider adoption. And I was very put off by that. But you can fail that process. You can't fail this one. If you don't quit, you will get a baby. That's how it works. So the trick is, how can you not quit? And how can you be okay? I don't really believe that the end justifies the means. Well, it doesn't matter what you go through as long as you get a baby in the end. Because they're both important. The end, of course, is important. It's great to get a baby, and you will get one. But the means is important too. The means is your life. It's how you're living day to day. It's not okay, well, we did get a baby, but my wife was really stressed out and she had a car accident and I had a stroke. I mean, that's not okay. That end doesn't justify that means. So you want a baby, and you also want to feel like you came through it with some sense of peace and stability, and that maybe your relationship is even stronger because of it. So this is what I was going to talk to you about. As I was saying, stress, this fight or flight mechanism that all of us had within us, is activated at different times from an old part of the oldest part of our brain, which is getting ready to flee or ready to fight. And yet, if we activate it too much and we don't flee and we don't fight, this is when we start to do some damage. But think of it this way. You don't always know the progress you're making. Sometimes you think you're making progress towards the adoption. Sometimes you don't. If you think you're not making progress, then it's very stressful. If you think you are, then you're kind of hopeful. Well, there's an interesting thing about hope and faith, because hope is how you feel right now about an imagined future that looks bright, isn't it? You're hopeful. You think that things are going to get better. But it's very, very close to despair. Despair is how you feel right now about an imagined future that doesn't look good. And hope can flip into despair very, very quickly. So, what's the thing to have? The thing that you really need to develop is faith. Faith that this will all work out. I'm sure it doesn't really help that I'm assuring you, don't worry, you'll get a baby. Everybody can say that. That may not help. But I do know that in this process, as long as you don't quit, that's what happens in the end. So let's talk about this. If stress is a function of interpretation, imagine this little person here, this is the legs, is trying to move towards you, okay? Ask yourself, is he making progress? Now keep looking. Is he making progress? Well, how about now? Is he making progress? Well, what if he starts going this way? You could say, well, he was making progress, but now he seems to be slipping. Well, suppose there was some obstacle in front of him like this, and this move to the side was what he needed to do. That would have been progress, you see? It's all of how you interpret it. Slipping sideways is not necessarily not making progress. It's all part of the process. Well, I wanted to tell you this story about how it is that you interpret things that happen to you. I believe that one day you'll tell this story to your children. But I've told this story with every talk that I've given, and I usually tell a little earlier in the talk, but I'll tell it now. And the story is about a king, and a king who had an advisor, an old man who was very wise. And the advisor, no matter what would happen, would say to him, "Don't worry, it's all for the best." And the king thought about that, and he said, "Well, I guess it is most of the time." He says, but no matter what it was, the advisor always had the same advice. "Don't worry, it's all for the best. It's all for the best." And this started to really annoy the king after a while. And the king thought to himself, not everything is all for the best. I can think of plenty of terrible things that are not all for the best. But the advisor always said that. But he didn't know that the king was so annoyed. Anyway, one night they were up late and they were having some big discussion, and the king wasn't looking at what he was doing. And he was over at the counter in the royal palace at the kitchen. And everybody else had gone to bed, and the advisor was sitting at the table having some tea in the kitchen. So the king says, and I still say, anyway, he hacked off his own finger by mistake with a cleaver. His finger rolled off the counter and fell on the floor. And he was bleeding and screaming, and he looked at the advisor, and the first thing he said was, "Don't you say it!" And the advisor said, "Don't worry, it's all for the best." He says, "That's it! You think this is all for the best? I just lost my finger, you idiot!" So he wakes everybody up in the palace, and he says, "Take him away, take him to the dungeon." All for the best. So they cauterized the king's little nub of what was left, and it healed, and he got himself another advisor, and this advisor was also very nice and wise. And luckily he didn't say that. He didn't say, "Don't worry, it's all for the best." And so one day the king and this advisor were out hunting wild boar. They were in a hunting party. And it was getting later and later. It was starting to get dark, and it was raining. And they got separated from the other party, and there was just the advisor and him, and they didn't know where they were, and they got more and more lost. And now it was getting dark. And finally the rain let up, but it was so dark they didn't know where they were. And out of the woods jumped all these bandits. And they said, "Oh ho, look what we have here! We got ourselves a king! And tonight is the night of our human sacrifice to the goddess Kali. Isn't this going to be great?" So they grab the king and the advisor, and they tie him up and bring him back to wherever they have their big festivities. And there's all this bonfire going on and this big blaze, and he says, "We got to get the king ready." So they strip him down, and they start oiling him up to sacrifice on this altar to Kali. And one of the people says, "Ew, look at this. This is disgusting. He doesn't even have all of his fingers. He's missing one of his digits. I think Kali would be insulted. We're going to send less than a full human specimen on that thing. That's not going to work." So they grab the other guy and start oiling him up. Well, no one's paying attention to the king anymore. He's like ignored. So he's in his underwear and he's backing out, and he keeps looking around, and nobody seems to care. And they're oiling up the other guy, and finally he just runs for it. And he's running and running and running all night, and he keeps looking at that nub of his and thinking, "Oh my God, the guy was right." And so he finally, in daybreak, he gets his bearings when the sun comes up, and he makes it back to the palace very early in the morning. And everybody's up there freaked out, and they say, "Oh, sire, we're so glad to see you. What had happened? We were so worried." He says, "Shut up, take me to the dungeon. Take me to the dungeon right now." So he goes to the dungeon, and there's this poor guy. He says, cut him down, cut him down. And he had him hung up, like this. And the old advisor, falls in a heap to the floor. And the king prostrates himself on the ground and says, "I'm so sorry. You were right. I went out there and these bandits captured me and they were going to sacrifice me, but then they saw that chopped off finger and they it saved my life. You were right. This was all for the best. Can you ever forgive me? I feel so terrible." And the advisor said, "Well, no, it's okay." He says, "What do you mean it's okay? I've had you in the dungeon for like 3 weeks now, hanging up by your wrists." He says, "No, it's all for the best. He says, you're not going to say that, are you? It's all for the best that I had you in here? He says, yes, it's all for the best. He says, don't you see? If I had been with you, with the bandits, you know. Anyway, that's the story. My wife and I had 6 fall-throughs before we got our children. If you're wondering why do we have 2 children, we had so many fall-throughs that we were accepting anything, and we were not saying no to anyone by the end. And we actually had 3 birth mothers who were willing to give us their baby by the end. But we couldn't handle triplets. We told a friend of ours about this other woman, so they ended up with that baby. But we accepted both of these birth mothers because we had had so many fall-throughs. Our first experience was interesting. We were completely in hope. We met this woman, and she was beautiful, and she was smart, and she was a college student, and she had just graduated, and she found out she was pregnant 2 weeks ago, and she really wasn't ready to have a baby, and we met her, and that was it. And we thought, well, that was easy. Somebody turned us on to this woman. We met her. She was lovely. I remember when she went to the bathroom, I said to my wife, do you realize we could never make a baby as good looking as we're going to get from this girl? We're not that good looking. And it was just so amazing that, you know, she liked us, we liked her, everything seemed to be great. Anyway, we went into hope. And it's a little dangerous place to be, because as I told you before, hope can very quickly flip into despair. Well, she got very close to my wife. My wife was taking her to all of her appointments, and we thought everything was great. And towards the end, one time we had a conversation, we said, well, is there anybody else who, she told us about an uncle who couldn't have children, who really wanted children. I said, well, did you ever consider giving the baby to your uncle? And she said, oh no, I didn't want to do that. That would be so weird, because I would be the baby's mother, but also the baby's aunt, and it was just strange. Am I a cousin? Am I the mother? And we said, you're absolutely right. That's a terrible idea. You're right. Because we just wanted her to give the baby to us. Well, as you might have guessed, a week before she was due, she stopped returning our calls. And it hit us like a ton of bricks. And we couldn't believe it. She just wouldn't return our calls, and then we found out she gave the baby to the uncle. And we were depressed after that. Our hope flipped into despair immediately, and our imagined future looked very bleak. And we stopped searching, we stopped everything. We didn't put any ads in anymore. And finally we regained our composure and decided to go at it again. But what we found was that was kind of a blessing in disguise. What we had not paid attention to was that we had a meeting once with her and her mother. So the birth grandmother was a very, very difficult person. And I remember meeting her thinking, this is the most litigious person I've ever met. She kept every person she talked about, she said how she sued them. She sued everyone. And I sued him, and I went after him, and I got $150,000, and I sued him, and I sued him. So looking back, I was sort of glad that that one didn't go through, because she would have been in our life, there's no question about it. And this mother was very, very difficult. Well, if you have faith, then basically instead of hope and despair where you can go up and down, and that's very stressful, if you have faith, it doesn't necessarily have to be faith in God, it can be faith in the universe, faith in that things will turn out. But just having faith at all, that this is okay. Remember, you're not doing anything wrong. You're going to provide a lovely home for a child. So if you have faith, then when things go up and down, you're not knocked back and forth by that. If you have faith that the right baby is making its way to you, then if it falls through, then that wasn't meant to be. I gave this talk to, a long, long time ago, I gave this talk, and one of the people who heard the talk was a friend of ours. They were trying to adopt a baby. And they had a birth mother all hooked up, it was all set, they were carrying beepers, everything was high tech, they had already gotten furniture, everything was all ready to go, and the same thing happened. She fizzled out at the end. And I said to him, I said, Dan, I'm so sorry to hear that fell through. And he said, well look, I heard your talk, that wasn't our kid. I said, well, that's a nice way to interpret it. Yeah, that wasn't our kid. If that was our kid, that would be it. Our kid's coming. But that wasn't our kid, so I'm not at all concerned. I don't want a baby that's not ours. And within 3 weeks, they found another birth mother and had a baby. It was just like a blip on the screen. But I thought that was a great way to be, a great way to handle that. sometimes you just don't know why you're going through the different experiences you go through. We had this one experience where we were really in despair. We still didn't have a baby, and it had been such a long time, and we had so many fall-throughs. And this couple called us up, and he was 17 and she was 16, and she was pregnant, and she was giving birth the next day. So I was like, what? He says, yes, could you meet us at the hospital? And we said, sure. So we drove to Baltimore, and they said, meet us at the Denny's near Hopkins. So I called my father, who's a pediatrician, and he worked at Hopkins, and I said, hey, I think this is it, this is going to be the baby. So we go down there, we drive to Denny's, and we get there, and the manager says, are you the people looking for the baby? I said, yes. He says, oh, she already went into labor. Go back over to the hospital. So we go to the hospital, and as I'm walking there, this young kid comes out, and he says, you know, are you Jim and Lauren? And he gives me this footprint. It was so cute. It was like a little baby's footprint, like somebody had stuck the baby's foot in ink and then put it on a little Post-it note. And there was the little baby's footprint. It says, congratulations, you're a dad. It's a boy. And I was so happy. And we went into the gift shop, and we bought some flowers, and as we're walking into the room, a social worker comes out of the room and says, not so fast, not so fast, and she backs us up and says, she's decided she's going to keep the baby. This all happened in a 24-hour period, okay? So we had these flowers in her hand, and we said, well, these are for her. We gave her the flowers. And we drove home. We didn't really say much on the drive home. And finally I just said to my wife, what the hell just happened here? I said, I feel like I just moved, I walked into a life-size moving clothes dryer, and woo-hoo, I was just spinning around for 24 hours, and I was lucky to find the door and just find my way out again. But that's how it went. I think that was our 5th fall through. Well, at any rate, you can have this be much less stressful if you tell yourself a different story. How about this one? Since you're making it up anyway, human beings are the meaning givers, remember? How about this story? There's a little soul out there that's going to find its way to us. And it doesn't necessarily have to come through this person's womb or that person's womb. It's going to find its way to my home. And all I have to be is ready and open and available. And if you have that kind of faith, then you don't have to worry about fall-throughs. When you don't have faith, then you think everything is significant. I remember we had this special baby phone that we put in, and the thing wouldn't ring. I was sure something was wrong with it. I was always calling it from the other line. But it would ring, but I thought maybe it only rings in this house. But we were afraid to leave. We would sit there and stare at the baby phone and hope that somebody would call and answer one of our ads. But it wouldn't ring. So I thought, it'll probably only ring if we leave the house. So we had a message machine on it. But I didn't want to do that because I thought the person who called, if they got a message machine, would hang up and go to the next person on their list, and we'd miss our baby. There's no faith in that. Can you see that? That's just being worried. I'll tell you, if you have faith, go out, go to the movies, come back. If it's meant to be, it's meant to be. When we got back one time, we finally got over that hump, someone had left a message, and it was our daughter's birth mother. And we were like the 3rd or 4th person she called, and she left a message, and we called her back, and it worked out. So there's a lot to be said for the interpretations that you make. For instance, if you have faith that you can't blow this, the right baby is going to find its way to you, then you can ask some of the harder questions. You can ask questions like, who supports you in this decision besides us? Lots of times, if only the person who wants this to go through is the little birth mother, then they get very close to you and they think everything's great, but once they give you that baby, they're gone, and they have no baby, and they don't really have you anymore like they used to. And what they go back to, perhaps, is an angry mother who didn't like the fact that she doesn't have a grandson or granddaughter. And so that's often a kind of a red flag. You want to find out who is supporting this adoption. Our son's birth mother was only 16, but her mother took me aside and said, let me tell you something. This adoption is going through. I said, okay. She says, I spent all this time raising these 2 girls myself. They're grown up now. I have a boyfriend. I have a business. I'm ready to move on. I'm not going back to diapers. This adoption is going through. And I thought, okay, this adoption is going through. Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think that's a great interpretation. Looking back, I can see that so many things were all for the best. All the fall-throughs we had were all for the best. And I'm not sorry we got the kids that we got. They're just perfect for us. We raised them as twins. And I felt that I didn't learn this lesson until actually I lived through it. But this idea of having faith and being very careful about the interpretations that you give. Also, I recommend that one of the nicest things you can do and the smartest things you can do if you really want the baby to come is start being a parent now. Don't wait for the baby to get here. Be a parent now. Feel like what it feels like to be a parent. See yourself as a parent. Go into the baby's room. Imagine yourself holding the baby, looking at your baby, and just let yourself feel what it would feel like to have this baby in your house and to love this baby and to be good parents. And I really think that helps. I can't prove it, but I believe that does something that makes it more available, that you're more open and available to this experience, and that you will have a baby out of this experience. There's certain actions that would follow from, certain stress-reducing stands that you can take. For instance, I love and respect myself, therefore, I'm not going to do this and I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do things that stress me out. Be as good to yourself and as kind to yourself as you can. Also, express yourself as much as you can. I wouldn't think, sometimes one partner wants to be strong for the other partner, but you really can't be strong forever. Sometimes you have to say what you're afraid of. There's nothing wrong with the two of you getting together, or if you're doing this by yourself, get together with a friend and say everything you're afraid of. Just get it out of your system. Say, I'm afraid that everybody's going to get a baby except us. Or I'm afraid that we won't be able to, they'll change the rules or something just when we're getting there. Or I'm afraid that we'll just be too old and nobody will want to give it to us because they'll think we're too old. Or I'm afraid that blah, blah, blah. Don't worry. Just say what it is and then be done with it. It's okay. You can have your fears. It doesn't really mean anything. But as soon as you can, start to focus on how you want to feel. Imagine how joyous you'll feel when you have this baby. And how much fun you'll have. And that's what you'll sort of bring into your life. I also think that, you get to a point where you can only accomplish so much through your actions. Yes, you have to put ads in. Yes, you have to get on the internet. Yes, you have to do whatever homework it requires. But at a certain point, you just can't do anymore. I'm the kind of person who can pretty much make things happen just by raising enough dust. And I have a lot of energy. And my wife said, Jimmy, I want a baby. And I went, wait here. I'll be right back. And I just set out to find a baby. And I exhausted myself. I remember I was just putting leaflets around, and this is before the internet or anything, and so I was stapling things to telephone poles, and I had this idea that I was going to make all these business cards saying, we want to adopt a baby, and we can't have children of our own, and then when everybody stood up to cheer, like when somebody was like going after a fly ball or something, I would throw these out into the audience. Luckily I didn't do that. But I just gave it everything I got. I was going through shopping malls. I would come up to salespeople. Hello, can I help you? I would say, yes. Are you pregnant or know someone who is? My wife and I want to have a baby and we can't. And they're like, no, I don't. And then finally, I remember that the manager of Bloomingdale's came up to me and said, sir, you cannot come up to our salespeople and ask everybody if they're pregnant. I just looked at her and I said, are you pregnant or know someone who is? And she's like, you can't do this. She sort of escorted me out. But at a certain point, I just sort of had to give up. Like, I can't do this, can I? I can't really make this happen through my efforts. The only thing I could do was have faith that it was going to happen, do as best I could, and then be in relationship with my wife and see what happened. And that's kind of how it worked out. At a certain point, my wife said to me, honey, it's been a year, we've been trying for a year and we still don't have anything. If we don't have a baby by my birthday, can I have a cat? I was like, okay, you can have a cat. So sure enough, her birthday came, and we got a cat, and she was all happy. And when we got home from getting the cat, we got the call about our daughter. So she got both. She got a kitten, and she also got our daughter. Anyway, I do know that there's something wonderful about the whole process of going through this, and that you get to meet some really wonderful people. It's my honor to speak with you. I have a lot of respect for adoptive parents. A lot of people sort of just, oh, guess what, we got pregnant, without much forethought. But when you meet people who are adoptive parents, they're very, very clear that they want to be parents, that they want children, that they want a family, and that they value that. And I remember we got support. We had fall-throughs, but we found other people who had had fall-throughs too, so we kind of formed our own little losers club. And we decided to meet once a month, have little picnics and stuff, and support each other until all of us got a baby. And it took us about 1.5 years, but by the end, everybody got a baby. And we actually hung in there till we all got 2 children. And I think almost all of us got 2 children. And the one person who actually had a baby and then had to give the baby back, which was very, very difficult. Ironically, a month later, she got pregnant, and she's had 2 biological children since then. So, truth is stranger than fiction. Anyway, there's a lot you can learn from this experience. You can learn patience and timing. You can learn to have a better relationship with your husband or with your wife or with yourself or with your partner. You can definitely learn to have faith. And I think it's a very valuable process to go through. It makes you value your children that much more. I know we do. I've put together a number of free videos online that you might like. You can find them by going to 7 steps, that's the number 7, 7 steps to a better relationship.com. 7 steps to a better relationship.com. I think you'll like them. They are things that you can do and say to enhance your relationship, ways to stay connected through any kind of a stressful situation. It's been my pleasure to speak with you, and I hope to meet you in person someday. Thank you very much. I'm Dr. Jim Goldstein.